Sometimes the most terrifying discovery isn't what someone did to you. It's realizing they've been doing it for months without you knowing. Chloe had always been the type of person who minded her own business. So when mail kept arriving from Marcus Henley, the previous tenant of her third-floor apartment, she simply wrote "Return to sender" on each envelope and left them by the mailboxes downstairs. The landlord had mentioned that Marcus had moved out suddenly, leaving no forwarding address. But these things happened in the city. People disappeared from each other's lives all the time. The packages started arriving 3 weeks after she'd moved in. The first one was small, wrapped in brown paper with no return address. Just Marcus Henley's name in block letters and her apartment number. Chloe left it with the mail, but when she came home from work the next day, it was still there. The mailman wouldn't take packages without proper postage for returns. And the landlord had made it clear that dealing with the previous tenant's affairs wasn't his problem. Just throw it away, her sister Emma had suggested over the phone. Or open it. Maybe there's something inside that tells you where to send it. Chloe had considered it, but something felt wrong about opening someone else's mail. So the package sat on her kitchen counter for a week, then 2, accumulating dust and her growing curiosity. The second package arrived on a rainy Thursday in October, larger than the first, same brown paper, same block letters. Then the third, the following Monday. By the time the fourth package arrived, Chloe's small kitchen counter looked like a makeshift post office for a ghost. The strange thing was, she'd never seen the mailman deliver them. They just appeared in the lobby, addressed to Marcus Henley, apartment 3B, her apartment. The apartment Marcus had supposedly vacated 2 months ago. On the night she finally opened the first package, Chloe had convinced herself she was being practical. She'd been living in the apartment for over a month now, and Marcus clearly wasn't coming back for his mail. Maybe there was a forwarding address inside, or something that would help her track him down. Her hands trembled slightly as she peeled back the brown paper. Inside was a plain cardboard box, the kind used for shipping photos. Her heart began to beat faster as she lifted the lid. The first photograph showed her bedroom window from the outside, taken at night with the lights on. She was visible as a silhouette, brushing her hair before bed. The timestamp in the corner read 3 weeks ago, just days after she'd moved in. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. She flipped to the next photo, her kitchen window, morning light streaming in, catching her in her pajamas, making coffee. Then another, her living room window in the evening, her figure clearly visible, reading on the couch. There were dozens of them, all taken from outside her apartment, all showing her going about her daily life, completely unaware she was being watched. The photos were crisp, professional quality, taken with a telephoto lens from somewhere across the street or from the building next door. The worst part was the progression. The timestamps showed they'd been taken regularly, almost daily, starting from her very first night in the apartment. Someone had been watching her from the moment she moved in. Chloe's legs felt weak. She sank into a kitchen chair, the photos scattered across the table like evidence of a crime she didn't understand. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Was Marcus the one watching her? Had he never really moved out? Was he living somewhere nearby, obsessing over his old apartment and whoever moved in next? But that didn't make sense. Why would someone mail photographs to themselves? Unless Marcus wasn't the one taking the photos. The realization hit her like cold water. Someone else was watching her. Someone who knew Marcus. Someone who was supposed to send him these pictures. The packages weren't being delivered to Marcus. They were being delivered to her, to show her that she was being watched. Chloe rushed to her living room window and peered through the blinds. The building across the street had dozens of windows, most dark now in the late evening hour. But one window on the 4th floor showed a faint glow, and she could swear she saw the outline of someone standing there. She stepped back from the window, her heart pounding. How long had they been watching? Were they watching right now? The remaining packages seemed to leer at her from the kitchen counter. With shaking hands, she opened the second one. More photos, these more recent. The timestamps showed they continued right up to yesterday. In one photo, she could see herself standing at this very kitchen counter, holding what looked like the first package. They had photographed her receiving the photographs of herself. The third package contained photos taken from different angles, different times of day. Someone had been documenting her routine with methodical precision. When she showered, when she cooked, when she worked at her laptop by the window. There were photos of her sleeping, taken somehow through her bedroom blinds. In the fourth package, she found something that made her blood freeze. Photos of her apartment's interior, taken when she wasn't home. Her bathroom, her bedroom, her closet. Someone had been inside her apartment, moving through her private spaces, documenting everything. And, tucked beneath the final photo, was a note in those same block letters. "Welcome home, Chloe." They knew her name. They'd known it all along. Chloe grabbed her phone and dialed 911. But as she waited for the operator to answer, she heard something that made her hang up immediately. The sound of a key turning in her front door lock. Slow, deliberate footsteps crossed her living room floor. She pressed herself against the kitchen wall, hardly daring to breathe. The photographs scattered across the table like proof of her nightmare. A voice called out softly from the darkness. "I hope you liked the pictures, Chloe. I have so many more to show you." The footsteps came closer, and Chloe realized with dawning horror that Marcus had never moved out at all. He'd just been waiting for the right person to move in, the person who would complete his collection. Leo stopped looking in mirrors 3 weeks ago, but he can still feel those hollow eyes watching him from every piece of glass he passes. The doctors say it's stress-induced psychosis, but they can't explain why his reflection has started moving on its own. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in downtown Portland. Leo had just finished a job interview at a marketing firm, one that hadn't gone particularly well, and was walking back to his car when he caught sight of his reflection in the window of a coffee shop. Nothing unusual at first, just his own tired face staring back, dark circles under his eyes from another sleepless night of job hunting. But there was someone else in that reflection, possibly thin man standing directly behind him, close enough that Leo should have felt his breath on his neck. The stranger's face was gaunt, almost skeletal, with deep-set eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His mouth hung slightly open, revealing teeth that looked too long and too sharp. Leo spun around so fast he nearly lost his balance. The sidewalk behind him was empty except for a mother pushing a stroller and an elderly man walking his dog, both at least 50 feet away. His heart hammered against his ribs as he turned back to the window, but now he saw only his own reflection, pale and shaken. He convinced himself it was stress. The job market had been brutal, and he'd been living on ramen and anxiety for months. Hallucinations weren't uncommon during periods of extreme stress. He'd read about that somewhere. But as he walked to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that those hollow eyes were still watching him. The next morning, Leo saw him again. This time, it was in the bathroom mirror as he brushed his teeth. The man stood in the same position, directly behind Leo's left shoulder, but he was closer now. Close enough that Leo could make out more details in the split second before he whirled around to find nothing but empty air. The stranger's skin had a waxy, translucent quality, like old parchment stretched too thin over bone. His clothes appeared to be from another era, a dark suit that hung loosely on his skeletal frame, with fabric that seemed to move independently of any breeze. But it was his expression that made Leo's blood run cold. The man wasn't just watching, he was hungry. His mouth had curved into the faintest suggestion of a smile, and his eyes held the focused intensity of a predator studying its prey. Leo started avoiding mirrors, but the man found other ways to appear, in the black screen of his laptop when it went to sleep, in the surface of his coffee mug, in every storefront window, car door, and puddle he passed. Each time, the figure was closer, and each time that hungry smile grew wider. Sleep became impossible. Leo would catch glimpses of movement in the darkened windows of his apartment. And when he'd force himself to look, there would be that face pressed so close to the glass that fog should have formed from his breath. But the surface remained pristine and cold. The worst part wasn't the appearances themselves. It was the growing certainty that the man was becoming more solid, more real with each sighting. What had started as a translucent, almost ghostly presence was gaining substance. Leo could see the individual threads in his antique clothing now, could make out the network of veins beneath his pale skin. On the 7th day, Leo made a mistake. Exhausted and desperate, he'd gone to his sister's house, hoping that a change of environment might break whatever psychological episode he was experiencing. Sarah was concerned, but patient, making him tea and listening as he tried to explain without sounding completely insane. "You need to see someone, Leo," she said gently, reaching across her kitchen table to squeeze his hand. "This level of stress can manifest in all kinds of ways. There are people who can help." He nodded, wanting to believe her rational explanation, when movement in the chrome surface of her refrigerator caught his eye. The man was there, standing between them at the table, but this time something was different. This time, he wasn't looking at Leo. He was looking at Sarah. Leo's sister continued talking, oblivious to the presence looming over her shoulder. But the man's hungry gaze was fixed on her with an intensity that made Leo's stomach lurch. For the first time, those hollow eyes held more than just malevolent interest. They held recognition, as if he'd found something he'd been searching for all along. "Sarah," Leo whispered, his voice barely audible. "Sarah, we need to leave. Now." She looked at him with growing concern. "Leo, what's wrong? You look like you've seen ... The lights went out. In the darkness, Leo heard something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The sound of glass cracking, not breaking, but developing hairline fractures that spread with deliberate, measured precision. The sound came from everywhere at once. The refrigerator, the microwave, the window over the sink, even Sarah's reading glasses on the counter. When the power flickered back on 30 seconds later, every reflective surface in the kitchen was spider-webbed with cracks. And in each fractured piece, Leo could see fragments of that gaunt face, multiplied dozens of times, all wearing the same satisfied smile. Sarah was gone. The police found no evidence of forced entry, no signs of struggle. The security cameras showed Leo entering alone and leaving alone 3 hours later. According to every official record, Sarah had simply vanished into thin air. But Leo knew better. He'd seen where she went. In that final moment before the lights returned, he'd caught a glimpse of her reflection in the broken glass. But she wasn't alone anymore. The tall man stood beside her in that fractured mirror world, his skeletal hand resting possessively on her shoulder as she stared out with eyes that no longer held any recognition of her brother. Leo doesn't look at reflections anymore. He's covered every mirror in his apartment with sheets, replaced his smartphone with an old flip phone, and walks with his eyes fixed firmly on the ground. But sometimes, late at night, he can still hear that sound, the deliberate, patient cracking of glass. And he knows the man is still there, waiting in the spaces between reflection and reality, growing stronger with each person who disappears. Growing hungrier. The doctors say Leo's condition is improving, that the medication is helping with his delusions. They don't believe his story about Sarah, about the man in the glass. They think his sister's disappearance triggered a complete psychological break. They might be right, but they can't explain why Leo's reflection has started moving independently, turning its head to watch him even when he stands perfectly still, or why, in the brief moments when he accidentally catches sight of himself, he can see someone else standing behind his reflection's shoulder, someone tall and gaunt and smiling, someone who's no longer content to simply watch. Sometimes the thing you've been trying not to see is the only thing that's been watching you. And sometimes It's been dead for 3 years. Amelia first noticed the shadow on a Tuesday morning in October, standing at her kitchen counter with a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. It was there in her peripheral vision, a tall, human-shaped blur that seemed to shift and breathe just outside the frame of her sight. When she turned to look directly at it, nothing was there except the empty hallway leading to her bedroom. She blamed it on stress. Her job at the insurance firm had been particularly demanding lately, and she'd been pulling 12-hour days for weeks. Peripheral vision distortions weren't uncommon when you were exhausted, she told herself. But as the days passed, the figure became a constant companion. It followed her everywhere. At work, she'd catch glimpses of it, standing behind her cubicle wall. At the grocery store, it lingered near the produce section while she selected apples. During her evening walks, it seemed to drift along the sidewalk 20 feet behind her, always just out of direct sight. The figure never moved when she was looking. But the moment her attention shifted elsewhere, she could sense it repositioning itself, drawing closer. Amelia tried to convince herself it was nothing more than her imagination, but the presence felt too real, too persistent. She could almost feel it watching her, studying her daily routines with a patience that made her skin crawl. Sleep became elusive. Even with her eyes closed, she could sense something standing at the foot of her bed, waiting. Her optometrist appointment had been scheduled for months, a routine checkup she'd been dreading. Dr. Martinez had been telling her for years that her prescription was getting stronger. She'd been stubbornly avoiding getting new glasses. When as she sat in the examination chair, squinting at the eye chart, she realized just how blurry her world had become. "Your vision has deteriorated significantly," Dr. Martinez said, adjusting the phoropter. "When was the last time you updated your prescription?" 3 years ago, Amelia admitted, feeling foolish. "That explains a lot." "You've been living in a very blurry world, haven't you?" She nodded, thinking about the shadowy figure that had been haunting her peripheral vision. Maybe that's all it was, her poor eyesight playing tricks on her, creating phantom shapes out of shadows and furniture. The new glasses were ready the following Friday. Amelia slipped them on in the optometrist's office and gasped. The world snapped into crystal clear focus with startling intensity. She could read street signs from across the parking lot, to make out individual leaves on distant trees, and see the fine details in strangers' faces as they walked by the window. Walking home, everything felt hyper-real and almost overwhelming. Colors seemed more vibrant, edges sharper, distances more precise. She was admiring her newly clarified view of the neighborhood when she stopped at the crosswalk on Maple Street, waiting for the light to change. That's when she saw him, standing on the opposite corner, as clear and solid as any living person, was David Chen. He was wearing the same gray wool coat he'd had on the last time she saw him, the same wire-rimmed glasses, the same concerned expression he always wore when he was thinking deeply about something. He was looking directly at her with those familiar dark eyes, and for a moment, Amelia felt a surge of joy and confusion. Then she remembered. David Chen had been dead for 3 years. The breath left her lungs in a sharp gasp. Hands began to shake as the reality crashed over her like ice water. David had died in a car accident on this very street corner, struck by a drunk driver while crossing to meet her for dinner. She had been running late that night, 15 minutes late, and he had been waiting for her right there in that exact spot. The light changed, but Amelia couldn't move. David remained perfectly still, watching her with that same patient expression he'd always had. The one that said he would wait for her no matter how long it took. Other pedestrians flowed around him like water around a stone, completely unaware of his presence. Amelia's vision began to blur again, but not from poor eyesight. Tears streamed down her face as the full horror of the past month crystallized. The figure in her peripheral vision. It had been David all along, waiting at the edges of her sight, trying to get her attention. But her old glasses had kept him mercifully out of focus. Shapeless shadow rather than the impossibly clear image of her dead. A car honked behind her, startling her back to the present. When she looked up, David was gone. The corner stood empty, except for a few leaves swirling in the autumn wind. That night, Amelia sat in her living room with the lights on, afraid to look anywhere but straight ahead. She could feel David's presence stronger than ever, no longer confined to her peripheral vision. He was there in the room with her. She was certain of it, but she couldn't bring herself to turn around and face him directly. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, and Amelia heard the soft creak of footsteps on the hardwood floor behind her. They were coming closer, the familiar sound of David's measured gait, a slight drag of his left foot that had developed after an old soccer injury. The footsteps stopped directly behind her chair. Amelia closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry I was late, David. I'm so sorry." When she finally found the courage to turn around, the room was empty. But on the coffee table next to her, placed carefully beside her cup of cold tea, was a single red rose, the same kind David used to bring her every Friday after work. The rose was real. The water droplets on its petals caught the lamplight, and Amelia realized with crystalline clarity that some things become more terrifying when you can finally see them perfectly. She never took the glasses off again, even though David never left her peripheral vision. Some shadows, she learned, are meant to be seen clearly, and some people never stop waiting, no matter how long you make them stand on that corner. And with that final story, we pull back from the abyss. For now, tales of ordinary lives brushing against the extraordinary, the terrifying, the unexplainable, from the shadow that mimics to the voice that calls from an empty house. We've seen tonight how thin the veil between our reality and a much darker one can be. These stories are not just fiction. They are born from real experiences, whispered in hushed tones, and shared to remind us that we are not always alone. And that's the most chilling thought, isn't it? Perhaps one of tonight's stories reminded you of something that happened to you, or to someone you know. A strange occurrence you've tried to forget. A noise in the night you rationalized away. A figure you saw for just a second. The details of your own brush with the darkness are what give this channel life. I invite you to leave your own story in the comments below. Let us know what you've seen in the shadows. If these stories sent a shiver down your spine, show your support by hitting that like button. It helps these tales reach others who need a reminder to check their locks at night. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell. We have so many more stories to share, and you won't want to be left in the dark. Until next time, remember that you are not afraid of being alone. You are afraid of the bone-deep certainty that you are not.